Happy New Year, and the News Gang is back. We are talking about 2019. We are only 10 days into that new year and the volcanic eruption out there in Mount Kenya. Why does the lava smell of succession? Murathi's suicide bomb mission. Is he a dog on a leash? Also on News Gang tonight, William Ruto's night of long knives. Oh, is it? And handshakes and kicks, and now an embrace. We take a closer look at the state of the Uhuru-Raila courtship. Let's begin with the central question, though, of why Mount Kenya just won't stop rumbling. The eruption began with a dramatic attack on the Deputy President William Ruto by the now former Jubilee Vice Chair David Murathi. Somewhere in there came the statement by Moses Kuria about development in Mount Kenya region, and then followed that washenzi remark by the President. And since then, it has been a roller coaster as different groups fall over themselves to show where they stand. Here now is an excerpt from a news conference held by a group of prominent political personalities from the regions just yesterday.
How can we discuss a vacuum when the presidency has somebody, the deputy presidency has somebody, and they are both saying, let us tone down on politics and concentrate on development? Where does the issue of a vacuum arise? And that's why we would like to interrogate this. We have 3.5 years to go. We do not have a lame duck presidency. Take that to the bank.
No vacuum, no lame duck president. Take that to the bank. LK, Kaikai, do we take that to the bank?
Yes, we can take that to the bank. And that can be explained in a number of ways. One is how Uhuru Kenyatta is approaching his second term. He has come out as a more assertive president. He is trying to make his own decisions largely, even creating his own space. And that is why you can now actually talk about this not being a lame duck presidency. Lame duck presidencies happen especially towards the end of the second term, but not at the beginning. Considering the kind of politics that have erupted in the region where the president...
And you're saying erupted, huh?
It was an eruption. It was an eruption because we all remember we had a very quiet Christmas politically. And then one evening, Moses Kuria happens. I would describe him as the lava in this eruption.
This eruption.
He flowed on the 31st. He flowed on the 31st of December, yeah. with a tweet, and in fact remarks that suggested the president is not doing enough for the region. Now, this is a very unusual attack. I don't think it has ever happened where we have a sitting president getting criticized by his region. I think it's sacrilege, politically speaking, in this country, that happened. Which is why you see, and you saw yesterday, almost political fossils coming out, for lack of a better description. You saw people you've not seen in the political scene for a long time. I don't know if you remember, you saw Joshua Toro. From
Engineer Joshua Toro.
And Elias Mbao.
And Elias Mbao. Yeah. I mean, this is what I'm describing as, okay, what is going on here? Yeah. They are all coming out and saying, no, this is not a lame duck president. Give him time to work.
But there's something interesting there that he talked about a vacuum in not there being a vacuum, because there have been suggestions, and I think some for good reason, the fact that the president is leaving office, at least that's what the constitution says, in 3 years' time, and yet the region finds itself in somewhat unfamiliar territory, considering that every major election, every election since 92, they've had a major candidate in there. And this time around, well, they might have a candidate they support, but there isn't anyone we can see this far who is sort of, in Kenyan political lingo, going to inherit the political base there from Uhuru Kenyatta.
It's a very valid point you make, Joe. Only that the question would be, the conversation has happened very, very early. Yeah. The president was only sworn in 1 year, just over a year ago. He began his second term. Now, but yes, that could be the undertone. The central region, the central Kenya region is saying, what happens in 2022? Because we may be in a position that we've never been since 1992.
Francis, you have been itching to say something.
Absolutely, because
he's the political man, and he's from Banana.
I may not take some of these things to the bank. Because speaking to a few members of parliament, especially from the Mount Kenya region, they're saying President Uhuru Kenyatta is exiting the stage. So they may not rely on him for political survival come 2022. Actually, some are even saying he will not be a factor in that competition. And if he won't be a factor, then it means they have to look for someone or something that will be a factor in that 2022 contest. Some of these members of parliament, I mean, statistics and history have shown us that up to 60–70% of members of parliament don't make it back to the next house. And so some of these MPs who you see speaking are trying to cut a niche for themselves. They're trying to make a situation for their survival. And so, if it is a question of survival, they are asking, do we rely on Uhuru Kenyatta for our survival? They relied on him for their survival in the last election because brandishing Uhuru Kenyatta in your constituency was almost a sure ticket for your election. I don't think brandishing him again in 2022 will earn you any votes in the Central Kenya region or the larger Mount Kenya region. But at the same time, it's too early. These 3 years, anything can happen. A lot more can happen in the course of these 3 years. So yes, you will see some subtle rebellion, call it, and it will be informed by some of these factors that we see today. For example, it would have been unimaginable for Moses Kuria to utter the words that he did in New Year's Eve 2015 or 2017, 16 actually. Yeah. It would have been suicidal. But today, he utters those words and you see people clapping, actually almost agreeing with him in some quarters. And some members of parliament, when they come to defend the president, they probably are also looking for their survival because remember, they were kicked out in nominations and so they want to be kicked in by supporting him.
And what you mentioned about interesting things, I mean, who would have thought that we would see a protest by, a member of parliament for Bahati, Sisini, Washenzi, Team Washenzi, I mean, against a sitting president in essentially what is his political stronghold. But here is also what is interesting for me, because then it also starts to speak to, can we talk about the role of political parties? Because there seems to be, a big failure after all of this was said by Murathe, and then Governor Waiguru came in and said, no, but we need fresh elections. This is the ruling party we're talking about. This is where you start to talk about the Political Parties Act, the Registrar of Political Parties. Is Jubilee itself, I mean, forget politically and whatever else is happening, is it, sound as a political party? I can bet this will not be the party that will feature anywhere.
And of course, that's not
SPVs.
But Yvonne, that will
special purpose vehicles for elections.
That will not be a surprise. I mean, think about it. The presidents we've had since '92. Think about it. I mean, we had Moi Ren on Kanu and won again in '97.
I think he's been the only consistent
in 2002. Yes, Uhuru ran on Kanu, but where is Kanu now? Can you even talk about it? If you talk about NAC that routed Kanu from power after 4 decades, NAC does not exist.
Even
some people say it does, but I don't believe it does. We actually have PNU that brought Kibaki to power in 2007. Right. Where is it? Some people were making noise about it. I don't know who it was. It Munya or someone saying, oh yeah, PNU. But it doesn't exist. Actually, can you imagine that right now as we sit here, the oldest serious political party is ODM? How can that be? ODM is what? How many? 12 years old? Now, yes. How can you have a country that has been independent for more than 50 years and the oldest serious
parliamentary the Jogo is still there. Kanu is still there, though not as powerful.
That is the point I'm making. I mean, everything is still there. Even NAC is still there, isn't it?
But maybe,
like you said,
maybe this is an opportunity to think through our political setup, the structure of our politics. In more developed democracies, they have few serious political parties. Look, 2002, 2007, 2013, 2017, new political parties have won. So yes, it means it's a shelf life of about 5 years, and then another. And
this one is done.
Because
but I wanted to add a little something else.
The parties, Yvonne, the parties mean nothing. It means zero. In fact, the conversation that is being had right now in Central Kenya or in Jubilee is not about the party. It's about the president, Uhuru Kenyatta. He exits the political scene in 2022.
Then what?
So nobody is saying what happens to our party constitution after 2022. They are saying what happens after Uhuru leaves, because they are special purpose vehicles. Like you said, they're just supposed to transport the voters from one term to another. So the conversation right now that's going on has nothing to do with political parties. And the reason is our country's politics are shaped by personalities, by regional blocs, ethnic communities. Those are the basis of our parties.
There's something that I think we might miss in this as we conclude this, because there is the whole question, yes, of what happens to the central region and all of that, but the president himself, some people say he can talk the way he does now because he knows that Raila Odinga is not calling his people on the street. There is no shutdown of Nairobi, the capital. There is no Nairobi business community and all of these interesting things we saw in 2017. And he can actually go out there and confidently make that Washenzi remark, and nothing much will happen.
The handshake, March 9th, 2018, altered the political environment completely. Actually, some of these things that you see today are as a result of the discomfort coming from the handshake. There are people who are used to a certain type of politics. It is no longer being played that way. I mean, it's like you trained for a certain system of the game, then you go to the field and you find it has changed totally. So some people are finding themselves in very unfamiliar territory. They were used to a certain kind of politics. They don't know how to survive. And this now introduces the whole question of how this succession game will be played. Is it under different rules? Is it under a different format or so? But ultimately, the Kenyan population or the voters will still be guided. You know what we call guided democracy. They'll be told now we are transiting from this format to this format, from this system to this system. And they will adapt, because the Kenyan political scene is that of adaptation.
And the first region to look for that guidance is Central Kenya. Absolutely. That is a conversation that is happening right now. It's a question of what happens after Uhuru Kenyatta. And that is why you're seeing a convergence of leaders who never used to agree with Uhuru Kenyatta. What is Martha Karua doing supporting Uhuru Kenyatta? She was a very, very sharp critic of the president. But here she is now, because the term is going to end in 3+ years, and the region will again be asking the question, where next? So I think there's also a lot of positioning, people coming out to try and position themselves. You saw the list of the array of leaders yesterday. It looked like, you know, a party of candidates who are looking for positions in 2022. They have to be on the right side of the exiting president. And
I think figuring out which is the right side is now the challenge for all of these politicians. And like you say, it's people coming out of the political woodworks, so to speak. I mean, Peter Kenneth, whom you will hardly ever hear from on any issue. I mean, could be doctors' fees, it could be VAT, which was something we struggled with. Peter Kenneth was nowhere to be found. Suddenly today, you know, he's here to tell us that there is no lame duck president, there's no vacuum, and that sort of thing. But if you take a look at all of those, even William Kabogo, who now is so much more outspoken, or to be fair though, he did start talking about Hakuna Deni just before, and that's what cost him you know, his seat, you know, in Kiambu County. But I mean, take a look at all of these people. It clearly is just everyone trying to, you know, after the rumble and the volcanic eruption, so now the earth is settling and you're trying to figure out, so, you know, which is the leeward side, which is the windward side. But it's absolutely shocking, and quite honestly, it's a little disappointing. Where was Peter Kenneth to talk about some of these issues? And remember, he was a presidential candidate.
The problem is,
I mean, he's been a presidential candidate before.
Unlike previous situations, like in 2002, 2007, 2013, 2017, the Mount Kenya region knew the exact line of succession. There was Mwai Kibaki, there was Uhuru Kenyatta. But now the question that many people are asking is, who next? However,
is there an answer to that question? Is there an answer to that question, by the way? Is it a necessary question even?
Yeah.
It may be a necessary question, because there's this kingpin kind of politics in our society. I mean, who is the point man in a certain region? Who is the point man in Western? Who is the point man in Central? That situation always arises. However, for Jubilee, probably that question should not have been arising, because President Uhuru Kenyatta told us that it will be Uhuru Kenyatta 10, William Ruto 10. But now the question is arising because there is a doubt, there is a question on whether actually that was part of it.
Where did the doubt come from? He made the promise, didn't he, in 2013? Or was he expected to continue to reiterate that at every
affirm
like
it.
But where
Affirm
did this
it.
doubt come from? I mean, it's interesting, right?
Handshake.
It's not like handshake.
Aha, talking about doubting,
There you go.
David Murathe was even more vocal this week. Actually, on Sunday, he resigned as the vice chairman of the Jubilee Party. Some say he was forced out. Some say he left strategically to maybe start the process of killing the party after it has served its purpose. Now, he had interesting things to say, particularly about Deputy President William Ruto, who ought to have been the heir apparent in Jubilee. Take a listen to what Murathe was saying.
I have my own reasons why I find he's not suitable for that office. I also have my own reasons why I think he should be content with having done his 2 terms of the paired presidency.
Somebody says,
Paired presidency.
yet another looming betrayal. Is it, Joe?
I think it sure smells like one. If you think about betrayal in the classical context of our politics, where betrayal means that I promise you that I'm going to give you something, politically speaking, and then when the time comes, I look like I don't know what you're talking about. And I mean, David Murathe, I think one of the reasons why his comments raised the temperatures in the manner they did, there's a sense in which he was seen, rightly or wrongly, to be speaking for the president. Just because he's been seen as a close ally of the president, he's the one who kept telling us what kind of president Uhuru Kenyatta will be in his second term. And so when he rises up just a few days into the new year and he says, hey, look, this guy is not fit to be president. At any rate, he has already served as deputy president. He should be content with that. Even coming up with ridiculous arguments from a legal standpoint that, you know, he has served as deputy president, which is somehow a co-president, and therefore a paired presidency, something that is totally alien to the Constitution. Yeah. But he knew, I mean, he was not making a legal argument per se, he was making a political argument. Yeah. So I think that this is actually a very interesting dynamic in the relationship between the two gentlemen at the top of what was the Jubilee ticket a few years ago, that in fact we might be beginning to see what is a very familiar script in our politics, where people make all these promises. The difference, though, why this is becoming very tricky even for President Kenyatta, is that all those others were never made public. I mean, Raila Odinga said in 2007, for example, 2005, thereabouts, that, you know, these people promised me, in fact, it was in 2003, the first time Kibaki named the cabinet, right. Then all these people rose up and say, you know, we had an MOU, some of these names were not supposed to be in the cabinet and all of that, but we were hearing it after the fact. We didn't know what they had agreed, and that is the same thing that we have seen over and over again. But for this one, they actually came out, and the president, as you were saying, said, well, nitafanya yangu 10, Ruto afanye yake 10, alafu hao wengine wanaweza kuja. So the anxiety that we see, the sort of tension that is there, is because, hey, why are you not talking about it now? Now you're just talking about my brother Raila, my elder brother, and no one is hearing my brother William.
Yvonne, Politics 101 teaches us basic things like, don't necessarily listen to that politician, listen to what they are not saying. Or, in this context, don't see Murathe, see someone or some people who would be behind him. Is that the context here?
I think so, and I think there was a lot of people that said, you know, now that he's out of, you know, the position of the vice chair of the party, that, you know, this was a good thing he's been ousted. It could actually be different, because now he can speak freely without the encumbrances of, you know, a title in the party, and now he would be free to really run riot. And remember, this is a man who has nothing to lose. He's not an MP. He doesn't, well, you know, anything can happen in the next 3 years, but he's not seemingly running for office. When was the last time he was in Parliament? It was a long time ago. So obviously there's a certain constituency that he is speaking for with respect to this. But here's the interesting thing, like you say about politics. What was that bromance we saw? They were wearing matching ties and everything. Did Murathe and, you know, as a vice chair of the party at the time, just realize all of those things he said? And by the way, he made some really serious statements about the deputy president. Serious allegations.
Actually, he even
called him
said
a thief?
these are Stop Ruto movement.
Exactly. So did they realize that he was one of the most corrupt people in Jubilee? When did Murathe realize that? Last week? Last month? I mean, they've been working very closely.
We're allowed to make discoveries, are they not?
Well, I suppose they are, but, you know, I guess that's politics, right? You can make a discovery.
I want to play you a soundbite, particularly on that question of those political promises. And then you'll tell us whether it is possible to take such promises to the bank or not. David Murathe.
If, as they allege, there was an MOU for the president to support the deputy president for another 10 years after he finishes his term, I'm challenging them to produce it.
Mimi nawaambia kitu kimoja peke yake, ya kwamba wagojee miaka 10 Uhuru amalize kazi yake, alafu wagojee miaka ingine 10 Ruto amalize kazi yake.
Yesterday, William Kabogo, the former governor of Kiambu, told us there was no MOU. Actually, they sat under a tree somewhere and agreed on some of these things. MOU once again.
Francis, MOUs in this country produce presidents. They don't convert vice presidents or deputy presidents into presidents. I hope you see the difference, because in 2002, when we first had the first MOU, the first MOU produced President Kibaki. And if you look at the MOU, it had a list of leaders, including those who are supposed to have been in the summit. The summit collapsed nearly immediately after President Kibaki took office. That is the work of the MOUs. MOUs work one step at a time. For the MOU whose existence we're not sure of, about the DP, Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta being in an arrangement that will see them do 10 years each, we have to wait and see. Because first of all, no one knows whether there's any such text. But these are political promises. And Francis, you can't talk about these MOUs without looking at the institution of the office of the vice president or deputy president. Historically in this country, this position is used as a carrot to attract votes. And when we covered the election in 1997, we remember that President Moi was dangling it between Ukambani, Kisii, and Western.
Yes.
Promising different communities that after this election, give me the votes, after this elections I'll appoint one of you as vice president. It's an overrated position. For anyone to rely on position of vice president to make it to president, it's very, very difficult, at least not through an MOU.
Isn't it one step two?
It's one step two. Yes, it is. But it can also be a so close yet so far. Mwai Kibaki did 10 years as Moi's vice president. He had to walk another 10 years in the opposition before becoming president. George Saitoti walked 12 years as vice president of Moi. The last time when Moi was now leaving office, he said, this is just a friend. Uongozi na urafiki ni tofauti.
Yes.
So, William Ruto happens to be the first deputy president under the new constitutional dispensation, meaning he's actually an elected deputy president. Now, this is a very interesting space for Kenyans. We are watching this transition for the first time to see whether an elected deputy president can actually transition so easily and succeed his boss.
Yvonne, clean slate politics. I mean, there's no incumbent in 2022, so to say, if you're to look at it in that context. Does it then introduce a more interesting contest than what we saw in 2017?
2002 maybe, remember? We're at the point, we're at the same point. I don't know how similar or different it would be when we were, you know, Moi was done with his 24 years. end his 2 terms per se, and then there was not coming in. Remember that jostling that we saw, except at that time, it was just about trying to make sure that you get a united opposition to be able to trounce who was then Moi's candidate, at the time, now President Uhuru Kenyatta. It'll be an interesting thing to see because, and even as you say, with MOUs that are written and non-written. I mean, and CORD and NASA have had written MOUs, haven't they? Things that were actually deposited at
the Registrar of
Political Parties. And even those were not, well, honored or as they say, oh, we didn't rise to the presidency.
The written part usually doesn't say the things that people later say they contain.
Yes.
But I think an interesting thing that we might miss in this is the fact that there are too many balls up in the air about this next election. Do we know if there's going to be a referendum? Do we know what this handshake is all about? Do we know if there's another MOU there? The other day when we were hosting on Newsnight, when we hosted Susan Kihika and Ngunjiri Wambogo, and there was this whole thing about the first handshake and the second handshake. Suddenly there was the reminder that there was actually another handshake. At least they didn't call it that back then, but there was this notion that there was a crisis and some people came together, and there was a crisis in 2017 again and some people came together. So which handshake is which? And I think that what becomes of the current handshake that we are talking about is actually going to determine a lot about that election. So much so that the issue of incumbency or lack of it might actually cease to be relevant depending on what happens. I mean, there are people who have said that the constitution could be changed, system of government could be changed, and that will introduce a totally new dynamic where some people who have run for offices might emerge and run for others. I mean, the president, for one, some people say, well, actually, if that is one of them, that, well, he's still very young, where is he going? So I think that until we know exactly what is going to happen with the handshake, until we know exactly whether we are going to have a new constitution or not, it is totally difficult to say what is going to happen to the country's that election in 2020.
Additionally, Francis, just of note is how DP Ruto responded or reacted to Murathe's statement. I think it was somewhere in Sugoi that he spoke and said this position is not going to be handed over.
Endorsement. I have the bite. Let's hear what the Deputy President had to say about that question of endorsement.
Na kama kuna mtu ako outside Jubilee ambaye anataka mambo ya Jubilee akuje mapema. Jubilee ni wazi. Wakuje wajiunge na Jubilee, tukutane wakati uchaguzi kitangazwa kwa madebe. Ama namna gani? So we need to be that clear. Watu wengine wawache kuongea porojo mingi huko, siasa sijui ya madeni, siasa ya loan, siasa ya nini. Hiyo ni siasa ya bure.
Siasa ya deni, siasa ya bure.
He is essentially saying, I'm ready for this with or without the endorsement. My plan is to run for president. And whoever wants to face me should face me in the nominations. He's basically saying, even if there is no MOU, even if it's trashed, I'm ready to go it alone. That's what I'm hearing from
and I think he has brilliantly handled this from a political standpoint, to be honest. I think this whole Deni thing and everything, because he could have been there saying, niliambiwa, nini. But he's been saying, well, you know what? There's no Deni here. There's an election. We are going to go through it. In fact, one of the interesting things I think he has done in the last 2 weeks or so, that same meeting, there was a comment he made about this whole referendum thing. He said, hata kama wanataka parliamentary, kama wanataka nini, mimi niko tayari. But it so happened that he was meeting MCAs, I think. So he said, the only thing I will not agree is wakianza kusema ati sisi kuna MCA wengi, Jimara County punguzwe. Your devolution part, if they try, then I'm not there.
Which is a preemptive attack.
It is,
it is quite smart politically.
Yes,
because
it is.
It's a preemptive attack. I don't know what your handshake is all about, but if it's about reducing the constituencies...
And there he immediately
MCAs
enlists the support of all these people who are going to go on self-preservation mode. If you're talking about governors, MCAs, I mean, if you were to say today, oh, we have too many MCAs, I don't know, 1,500 nominated. Jamila is not here today to give us all the numbers. But if you're going to say anything to the effect of trying to reduce the number of counties, for example, then of course governor's antenna will be up. So this guy is just saying, hey, you can do everything else you want with parliamentary, whatever, but if you touch devolution, because he knows that he will have MCAs on his side, he will have all these governors on his side, because there's at least half of the governors who are still going to be running for...
Okay. Joe, remember, even as you say, remember in 2010 during the constitution making process, even agreeing on the number of counties was a problem, because almost every district then wanted to be a county, and it was not possible to have 80, 90 counties. That's why some had to be merged. And there's the whole question of ethnic alignment in some of those counties, how that politics, how the politics is played out. So if you talk about a referendum, which you can smell from afar, then that is the next main game in this contest.
And that referendum, was that possibly discussed? We're talking about MOUs, right? What was really discussed in that room in March 2018, as both President Uhuru Kenyatta and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga came in? There was most likely some sort of verbal MOU as well, and that is something else. We don't know to date exactly what was discussed in that room. The Building Bridges Initiative is going around the country collecting that, but we all know there must have been some sort of agreement that brought these two men together, and that's another factor that you will have to consider. Was a referendum discussed at that point? Was it discussed when both of them were in Mombasa just a couple of days ago? That is also another MOU to actually think about, because to be honest, there was about, what, 4 or 5 people in the room that day. So also a lot of what was decided and agreed upon there is what we will start to see play out.
You can get the subtle hints. For example, when President Uhuru Kenyatta was in Kisumu, he asked a rhetorical question. Is this winner-takes-it-all system of administration, i.e. the presidential system of governance, the problem? I've heard some say it's a Ferrari kind of a presidency where you have the president and the co-driver. Maybe you need a matatu presidency or a probox presidency where you can have many people, the driver, the co-driver, and a few passengers, and maybe a conductor.
I think the most unfortunate thing is that the president and the former prime minister have thrown the country into a very unfair conversation, a very unfair debate, because we are having a debate without a subject. What is the subject? Even this talk of changing the constitution, nobody has really stepped forward and said, this is what we want to change.
Inclusivity.
They talk of inclusivity. But what does that mean? Winner takes it all. What does that mean as well? I think what a lot of Kenyans would be waiting for is what the Building Bridges Initiative will come up with as a solid, substantive proposal on what the country should be discussing. Otherwise, right now, that's why the DP was shooting in the air. Basically, he was firing flares in the direction of devolution. If you are touching devolution, then we'll have a problem. It's very speculative. Nobody knows what it is that they want. So we are all engaged in a very speculative discussion.
Speculative in the sense that you have an answer, but you're being asked to work backwards and get a formula. Yeah, Yvonne?
And they know the answer. Well, they've already decided it. It's obviously a very boardroom conversation. But there's many issues, if you were to consider, a referendum and changing the constitution, like you're saying, that are not coming up. If we're talking about the number of counties and whether they are economically viable, I mean, take a look at all of these economic blocks, Loreb, Noreb, the North, the East, the West. They're all coming together for the purpose of economic development, for the purposes of, like right now, they're actually grappling the Lake Region economic bloc with, can we open a bank? Can we open an institution? Can we pool all our monies and our resources together? These are some of the issues, and I'm afraid that none of these issues are actually what is, on the table of discussion, or rather, this is not even the answer they have. Could there possibly be a situation, you know, like Russia with Dmitry Medvedev and Putin, and they keep switching roles and prime minister and presidency?
The truth, Yvonne, is that if politics underpins all of these things, and I think that is why, as a country, we have been stuck with politics for the last 55 years without actually moving on to these other substantive conversations. Because remember, Kwame Nkrumah talked about seeking the political kingdom first and the other things will come. And I guess that, it sounded blasphemous, but I think his point was that if you do not fix the politics, then everything else is actually not going to happen. So that is why in this country, because our politics still smacks of people call sense of grievance, people who think that something has gone wrong for them politically over this period of time. There are people who feel a sense of injustice and all these things. So we have a sense in which our politics is not settled. Our politics is restive. Every time we go for an election, it's absolutely mad. So we have the political question that those things about banks and all those things, those conversations, I can assure you, will never happen until we have settled the political question.
And Joe, last time we had this conversation here and on fixing of politics. And my argument was, and still remains, fixing elections.
Yeah.
Fixing elections.
Which we're not talking about.
We've never had a peaceful transition from one party to another. And don't talk about 2002, because that was a very, very different scenario. In fact, I would dare say that if Kenya was the DRC, Shadari would be president today. The number 3 can actually be president.
I sort of predicted that.
But even then,
but
even then, that introduces another question. Are we discussing the wrong thing? Are we discussing the wrong topic?
Yes.
Because if there's peace, there's calmness, what wametulia, why not deal with issues that have been a problem previously?
No, for example, but right now, we're not being invited to have that conversation.
I think the reason why some people in this country believe the handshake could be a good thing, depending on what the two leaders do with it, is exactly that they have been saying the right things. As to whether they end up doing the right thing is a different story, because they have been saying, if you listen to what the president has been saying, Raila Odinga, I spoke to him about a month ago on Christmas Eve, and he sounded like he was committed to that existential question of trying to resolve the country's political history and all the issues that have arisen therein. And the president also seems focused on this thing that is bigger than the current politics. Now, politicians, of course, speak the way they want, and sometimes they mean what they're not saying, and the reverse. But I think that if this handshake ends up being about attempting to confront the historical political questions in this country, including what Kaikai is talking about, where people can go to an election and know that what they say in the ballot box is what is going to come out on the other end, and that whoever then loses in that fair contest then can go and shake the hand of whoever won the election, and we move on, even if the difference is 0.0001%, then we will actually be making progress. But if this ends up being about sharing seats and everything, then from everything that I'm hearing, it looks like it could just be another political talk, and we'll go back to where we've been.
May I be the skeptic? So this Building Bridges initiative could possibly be the one that handles that question. Haven't we gone down this road before? What was the Krigler Commission all about? What were all of these things? We have attempted to deal with these existential questions in this country. Politics, elections, 50+1. That was all the process regarding that. I don't know.
It's why we keep going back. It's why we keep going back, because we haven't resolved it.
But it's not because we don't know how to. I mean, so forgive me and my skepticism and my cynicism as to whether this will be the one that actually gets us there.
I think we need to give them time to put whatever it is they have as a proposal on the table. Is it constitutional changes again? My argument remains the same. We have a constitution that is not too bad. It's not perfect, it needs some changes, but there's a lot of things that are about our mannerisms as a country. Are we a law-oriented society? Do we like processes? Do we respect processes? Or are we like the fans that went to beat the referee the other day?
We are a very, we may not be very good in following the law, but we are very political. I mean, 2019 will be a very political year. That one, I think there's no doubt about it. Why?
You can take to the bank.
Absolutely. Because these are population census, a very political process, actually very emotive. Thereafter, there's the boundaries, the limitation, an equally emotive and political process. And then when you hear talk of a referendum around the corner, maybe end of this year or early next year, then that tells you we will be in a lot of politics, even though there's some people who say there's fatigue.
No, in Kenya there is no fatigue in politics. Look at how we are consuming high-octane politics as if the 2022 election
is 6 months away.
Will happen before the end of this year. This is us. And in fact, the earlier we started knowing how to let that coexist with the rest of our lives, for example, our civil service that will not then be disturbed by what is going on politically. And it's very, very interesting to see, Joe, this week, that the president is under attack and not a single cabinet secretary will come to his defense. Just tells you how much changed in the constitution. Because now ministers are these people with tied hands. In the past, they'll be the ones coming to Kiambu and telling Moses Kuria, what are you talking about? We launched this the other day. So a lot has changed. And if those are the issues they are discussing.
Yeah, actually, Matiang'i has been at the coast, but he's talking about crime in Malindi, and I don't know, wherever he's meeting county commissioners and all of that thing.
Absolutely.
And not talking about handshake, Washenzi, development and all of this.
But listen, we've talked about the handshake quite a bit. So let's zero in a little bit. You're saying it's the reason we don't have a lame duck president, and that has possibly changed. You're saying that is probably what makes some people think that President Uhuru Kenyatta will not necessarily follow through on the promise that he made to ensure that he passes the baton on to his deputy. What comes with the handshake? Well, quite a bit. Cake, drinks. And guys, in 2019, there's a new couple in town. So take a look at them. They are throwing birthday parties for each other. They are drinking, they're dancing, they're whining. I mean, take a look at that. So, there's a new couple in town. President Uhuru Kenyatta, Raila Odinga ought to be a fly on the wall for where the deputy president was when all of this was happening and all these videos are coming out. So it's not just handshakes and cakes and whining and dining and dancing. I mean, even those who were resisting each other are now embracing each other. So is all well in this country? I mean,
to your question about where the deputy president was, who goes to their honeymoon with their best man?
Okay.
Nobody does that.
But
all right.
talking about the birthdays.
No, we need a moment.